Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the third submission by Louise and her horse Mozart. You can see from that still picture how nicely this horse is starting to develop. Don't know why this ended up as black and white, but I actually really like it like this. It's actually quite fascinating to kind of watch, and you're doing a really great job with this horse. I mean, this is just getting to be such a nice stretch. First I thought you were out there in snow, but I think it's just sand that you're on there. But it's really fun to watch this type of horse develop because you can see how clearly they go from looking like something that should be pulling a plow to looking like something that you could gallop cross country on or do dressage on or whatever the case might be. So it's lovely to see them taking shape the way we see this one doing. You see how that belly is really starting to pull up. And we can see how he's flattened out there behind the withers. And once again, that comes from that full stretch. You know, once again, we very often have people writing to us, or people telling other people how far you should stretch a horse down, and horses should never be stretched further than the knees and all these kinds of things. And the reality is that you need to stretch all the way down with all horses all the way along, especially when their back gets stiff, I'm just dealing with some of our horses now. We have just moved to our new barn, which we're extremely happy about, and one of the biggest reasons that we moved is the footing was so bad where we were, that we were starting to have some problems with it, and as well as the stabling and everything else. Of course, we've been working on this for a long time. But it really does make a difference having consistent footing, folks. You got to remember that in the beginning, when we first start with horses, and we're just getting them to stretch down, we can work in all kinds of footing, as we see people on here all the time doing, snow and wind and rain and hard and people out in fields and this sort of thing. But you do have to remember that, the point at which you really get horses swinging over their backs in big optimal strides, footing does make a big difference. You can't open a horse up out in the middle of a field that's full of holes in the same way that you can on footing that is consistent. So that is always going to be problematic after a certain point with horses. We can get them started once again, but if we really want to start opening those extensions and these kinds of things, you have to have decent footing to do it on. And of course, the harder the footing is, the more your horse's feet are going to get sore. So the faster you go, the more concussion. So if you're riding on one of these rings, like where some of you guys live, where it's frozen all winter long, and this kind of thing, and you're riding on kind of frozen ground, you've got to remember that the faster you go, the more concussion that is putting on the horse's legs. So we have to be careful of that. So once again, if we're really going to open up horses into their optimal strides and work on big lengthenings and things like this, that needs to be done on good footing, or you can really damage the horse and yourself. Once again, you can't be doing a big extension across the field that's full of holes and, and expect it to go well. So we have to be conservative depending on the footing, like a good cross-country rider, who should know that, like for instance, if you're out fox hunting, as I used to do so often, you don't, you ride them open where you can, but when you go down through creeks and all this kind of stuff, it's only a fool who dumps into a creek without knowing what's there, without going slowly, this kind of thing, so we know what the horse is stepping into. So once again, we just have to be cautious of the footing that we're on and know that it does have an effect on the back of horses, so it's okay to get started, but if you're going to start working in big open gates, things like that, it's going to be difficult if you don't have good footing or can lame up your horses, as the case may be. So we just went through a thing here in California where it was quite hard a lot due to the fact that we had no rain last winter. So everything started getting really hard, and we had to be very careful of what we were doing. But what you're doing here is excellent. I just love watching this horse stretch. I almost want to just put this to music. It's got such a good rhythm to it. And it's such a pretty photograph in the black and white, really brings out the movement of the horse. So it's kind of interesting to do it this way, so it's hard to be distracted since the horse stands out so well against the black and white background. But this is really good stretch, and look how rhythmic and active, and you can even see this horse's back here starting to swing a little bit. As we really see that shift and how the back begins to move forward and back. So this is all really excellent, an excellent stretch. And of course, once we can get that stretch down, then of course the next step is to start bringing them back up, just like we do when we ride. So the next step of working hand is to begin to bring them up into working frames in the working hand as well. So we stretch them all the way down, then we start bringing them back up. So someone today wrote me about, they want sort of a step-by-step detail of what we do here and how to go about training. So what I've tried to show all of you is the steps. The horse kind of dictates what we do next as we get things, but it's not like we're just going to put the horse into a stretch and leave it there for 2 years. As soon as we can get the stretch all the way down, we're going to start trying to bring the horse back up. But of course, if we lose the back guides us. So once you understand that, that's really what the system is understanding to keep the horse over the back. So anything we do that loses that, we have to go back and regain that movement over the back before we move on. But from the point at which we get the horse stretching, we're going to start trying to bring them up. Once we can get it all the way down and consistent for a few weeks or even a couple of days, then it's time to see what you can do. Many of them can come right back up into a good frame quite quickly. A horse like this who doesn't have a badly damaged back. But we also have to take into consideration that idea, if you have some horse that's 20 years old, it's been sway back for years, and coming out of retirement, it's going to take you a while to do that. In fact, it may take a couple of years before you start bringing them up. You can't bring them up if the back is completely sway back. So we have to take all this into consideration when we're working these horses. How damaged are they when we start? I'm just starting a bunch of babies now, so you'll begin to see how quickly it goes with horses that aren't damaged to start with. And of course, those of you who have horses that have been overbroken in the neck, that have been overflexed in the third or fourth vertebra, those horses it always takes a year to 2 years. In the case of Bailador, it's taken me 3 or 4 years to get him healed up. But he was sway backed, he had kissing spine, he had big holes in his back where the saddle had cut off his circulation all the way to the bone. He was completely broken over in the neck, and I think he was in pain with every step that he took. So it's taken me about 4 years or so to get him straightened out. He was an extreme case, and happily his owner was able to let me go along long enough to get it done. Otherwise, he would have just been a lawn ornament. But now he's going quite beautifully. So they all take a different amount of time. But even with him, as soon as I get them down, I start trying to come up again. So that's what you can start doing here in your working hand. So what I'd like to see you start doing now that you have this really good stretch is now trying to bring them up a little bit in your hands and doing a little more lateral work, which I think you could add, going down the center line, doing a little more step over, a little shoulder in down the long side. So you're beginning to add a little more of those in. But of course, remember, getting that consistent stretch and why we do the lateral work, we always do it to re-engage the horse back up through the back again. Remember, that's the whole point of a shoulder inner leg yield, is to bring that inside hind leg under the body of the horse so that when it pushes off, it pushes the back up and pushes the withers up through the shoulders, and the neck consequently wants to go down when we do that. That's the natural place for them to be. I'll show you a horse here that I just started a baby out of a field that was literally, it's a racehorse that just barely even halter broke, and I'll show you its first day of work. And you can see how at the end of it, after 10 minutes, the horse is walking along, stretching all the way down. Once again, that's where they want to go to, if they haven't been kept from doing it. Really good stretch here, though. It's just fascinating to watch this. I love to watch it in rhythm like this, even with the sound off. As I said, I always kind of want to put music to this and watch how you can watch that consistent rhythm going, which you've really done a good job. So the next step now, as I said, is beginning to bring this horse up into a more of a working frame while you're doing this work in hand, and see if you can bring the horse's head and neck up a little bit and maintain the softness of the jaw and poll. Now, some of these kind of horses that you're working with here, the fjords and things like this, they can be rather thick in the throat latch. Now, this one isn't overly that way, and actually almost all of them, that will all thin down once you get the horse working over its back. A lot of these horses, the other problem with them is they often go to fat very quickly. If you leave them out in pasture for a month and you come back and they look like they're a pregnant mare. So they gain weight very quickly. So we always have to be sure we're monitoring that. Just like with a horse that's underweight, we have to keep monitoring how much weight they're taking, that they're eating enough to begin to put some muscle on. But that was really good work in hand. So the next step is to see you begin to bring the horse up to where you can bring it to, in other words, beginning to see if we can develop the working walk in the work in hand, bringing the neck up without losing that rhythm, that good rhythm that you have. Now, the stretch is absolutely perfect. What you're doing there is pretty much exactly right on, and he's really stretching beautifully. And once again, if you find that he can't come up, simply he hasn't developed enough yet, or maybe your skills haven't developed enough yet, but they do by trying, so that's the idea. And by doing that in the work in hand, it will give you a good idea of what has to happen when we're on the back of the horse. Once again, if we take hold of the reins and the movement is destroyed, we know that that's not correct. So we had a good stretch here in the trot when you started there. See him open his mouth a little bit, but he's a little bit on the slow side here. So we can see it's not really swinging. It's kind of a short. You can see him kind of stabbing his front legs, and you can see how the underside of the neck is still up there a little bit. So that tells us in the trot work here, he's just kind of pulling. Now watch what happens here. Now watch how the hocks immediately start moving as soon as that head and neck drops down. And you see how the shoulder begins to swing freely. Once again, as he comes up, watch how he starts to stab the front legs again. And once again, as he goes down, we'll look at how much more flexion there is in the hocks. So that's a really good start, but we need that stretch all the way down to help him there a little bit. Now, do also remember, and we'll be talking about this soon in a video for everybody, as I go around and give these clinics, I kind of see that trends are beginning to happen with people. And the first time or the second time I went back to Europe, I discovered that everybody kind of had the idea that you were never supposed to use side reins or anything, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. You know, at some point you have to teach the horse to stretch, not only to stretch his neck down, but to stretch into the contact with the bridle. And if you never have done that, I mean, horses will stretch on their own without anything on them, but at some point in order to ride them, we have to teach them what the bit is supposed to do and how we communicate with them through that. So we do want to work horses inside reins and teaching them to stretch correctly. And once they get far enough, I hope you've all watched the videos on bringing the horse up in the stretch, how we move the side reins up higher, and when the horse is ready to come up into a working trot, it will without curling over those reins. Now this is a much better trot now. Here we see how it starts to swing. Not quite as big as it was a moment ago in the very beginning there when we really got a really big swing. But this is much better than what we had before. We can see how the underside of the neck is releasing, and the shoulder starts to swing more freely rather than that just little sort of trotty trot thing that he was doing there in the beginning. Now that's really good, and once again, could be a little more active than that. So when he gets to there, just try to activate a little bit more so we see a little more push from the hocks, that is pushing up into the back, which of course is what lifts the front end off the ground. That's what lightens the front end, is when the thrust of the hind legs pushes up and lifts the front end of the horse off the ground. That's what it means for a horse to be light. So many people today think that their horses are light. I didn't think they're on the bit when they pull their heads over. But if you look at how they're moving, even the ones that raise their knees up in the air, you've got to look at whether the whole body, is the front end of the whole horse lifting off the ground. That's what we're looking for. That is being lifted by the thrust of the stride of the hind leg. Now there, and once again, see when he gets in that position, see how much more movement into the hock. Now these horses are great to work on because they're not, they're not built with a lot of flexion in their hock. So if we don't get them right, they will never look right. They'll just have that stumpy little stride that you had, like for instance, when she first started out on the lunge line here. So these horses are wonderful because I think people can really see, like with this one, you can really see how this horse is trimmed up. You can see how that neck has come forward, how the withers is pulled up through the shoulders a bit, how he's engaging up through that abdominal wall, which tells us the horse is beginning to thrust up. And once again, we can have this horse is flattening right behind the withers. The withers is going to start to come up even more, but look how nice and flat it is behind the withers. So we don't see that sort of sunkenness behind the withers that is so common these days. And really good walk back in the stretch. And you're doing just the right thing. Come back, you try the trot for a while, you get it swinging, then you come back to what you can do the most correctly, which in this particular case is coming back to the walk. So it would be good to see you experimenting here with the side reins here pretty soon, just to see what, I'd like to see what he does with those. You can just use a surcingle to do that if you have one. So what we're looking for, if you had that surcingle on, when he stretches down, we would like the horse to stretch into that contact. In other words, when he stretches all the way down, he should be at the end of the side reins and actually feeling the contact with the reins. Otherwise, when we get on, the horse simply doesn't know what we're doing, or it has no experience of what it's supposed to do with its mouth or how we communicate with it. So once again, that's what we're trying to do in much of this work, is set ourselves up for success so that when we get on the back of the horse, it's already kind of knows what it's supposed to do, if you will. It's accepted contact with the bridle through the work in hand. We teach them to move off the leg, and we get on and we can pretty much ride away, rather than going through all the sort of dangerous steps that we see people doing when they get on horses too soon, that is. I mean, how many people I've seen injured by doing just that? Get all the groundwork right, you have much less chance of getting yourself hurt in the process. And also being sure that the lunging, once you have a system that's working for you, and when you start riding, you want to keep the same system. You'd want to do your work in hand, do that little bit of lunging, and then get on. And you want to keep doing that for quite a while, at least probably the first couple of years of a horse's training. And then when we start to ride without the lunging, now look how good that's starting to be right there. Now see how it's starting to have a little more step, the shoulder is starting to swing a little freer. Could still be a little more active, but you're getting to a good place there. So getting enough activity without pushing it too far. Once again, if it gets too fast, then the horse will start to run down onto its forehand. Every horse has a speed at which if you go too fast, it will drive the horse onto the forehand. But once again, it's great to train this kind of horse because you can really see how they change, and you can see how that straight hock can really start to bend. Most of these horses that you see, if they haven't been trained correctly, you'll see how their hind legs move almost like fence posts. There's almost no flexion in the hocks at all. And once again, that's what's fooled so many people these days with these very expensive horses that are being bred today. They have so much movement in the hocks that it fools people because they still see all this movement in the hock because we always used to think about that, that, okay, well, if they lose the rhythm in the hock, but these days, these horses that are so well bred, they have, they're so bred to have flexion in the hocks that if they, even when they're upside down, it still looks like a lot, compared to what people, like with a horse like this, what you're looking at. So it's just fooled a lot of people as to what's going on, including many of the judges today. So it's not just being in rhythm, it's being rhythm and staying over the back. But remember, when we talk about a horse being in rhythm, we're talking about the two ends of the horse being in rhythm, not just the speed at which you're going around the ring. So that's what we always have to look at. And you see a lot of these expensive, active, hollow horses that we see today. You've got to look at both ends. That's why we always talk about in dressage. If the hind leg must always come through at the same swing level as the front legs. If it doesn't, that is, if the front leg is doing one thing and the back is doing another, you're basically splitting the horse in half with each stride, and of course overstressing all the tendons. So this is a little slow here again. Once again, I'd like to see this a little more active. So in your next video, I'd like to see you beginning to bring the horse up in the work in hand, trying to bring him up, and let's see what we can do with that, getting up into a higher frame a little bit. See if you can do it. If you can't, you put him right back down again. He may only be able to stay there for a couple of strides, but that's what you want to start working now. And with your lunging, I'd like to see you starting to work in some side reins and beginning to let the horse stretch into the contact. Now that's better there. And once again, look how when he gets all the way down there, I just want to see when you get to there just a little more power in the horse. So try to ask for a little more. So great job here, and beautiful video, by the way, and really good rhythm almost throughout.